welcome to the Emotional Web Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human condition. And this is episode 31. Welcome along, fair listener, to this, the latest episode of the Emotional Web Podcast. And in a change of format, you've got me on my lonesome this week. I say on my lonesome, I have a bit of a cold with me, so I'm a little bit nasal, so apologies for sounding a bit bunged up, but it's just me this week. And I decided I wanted to do a bit of a taking stock type podcast, and also do a reflective podcast as well. So we talk in learning and organisational development practice, and I guess in wider HR practice as well. We talk about the importance of reflecting and sense making and learning along the way. So I thought it would be a good idea to do some of that in this episode of the podcast. Because the last time I did it was at the start of the year, start of 2018, and we're now into September. So it was at the start of 2018 that I did my kind of setting out my stall for the year. I had to listen back to that recently, and it reminded me of 2017, so that we'll just move on from that one. But also it reminded me of some of the things that I said I was going to do this year, some of the things that I put on the record that I was going to do, and I haven't done, actually, which was interesting. Some of them I have, but some of them I haven't. So that's been some interesting thoughts, but I'll come back to that in a moment. In particular, for this episode, I wanted to introduce the Emotion at Work Hub. So if you're anywhere near a web browser, please feel free to close your podcast app and open your web browser and type in community.emotionatwork.co.uk. So that's community.emotionatwork.co.uk, and you will find the Emotion at Work Hub. Now, this is something that has been in my mind for a while now. Probably March, April time was when I first decided that this was something that I wanted to do, and it's taking a while to come together. Taken a while to come to fruition, and it is by no means the finished product. So at the risk of being like really cliche and talking about the thing that everybody talks about, I've created what I think is a minimum viable product. So it's enough of a product that I think you, as a fair listener of this podcast and potential member of the hub and user of the facilities within it, so there's enough there for you to get your head around and for you to give me some thoughts and reflections and give me some advice about how you think it needs to be and what you think it needs to be like and what you think is good and what you think needs to be improved. It's also there to help and support you, though, as a practitioner. So the Emotional Work Hub is something that, like I said, it's been in my mind for a few months, and it comes from way back in sort of 2011, when I started to make the transition from reading lots of books and swallowing what the author said to being more what the lovely Simon Heath one, or proper name Simon Heath, would do, which is be more discerning. So, for example, there is a book by a guy called Navarro, which is entitled What Everybody Is Saying. And it's a body language book, and it was something that I bought in 2010, I think. And when I read it might be 2009 actually, but either way, and when I read it I was like, wow, this is amazing. This tells me exactly what people's body postures mean, and I took it as read, really. Kind of just took his ideas, took what he was suggesting, hook, line and sinker. You know, if somebody is pulling the shirt collar on their shirt, it means they're anxious and they're nervous, and therefore you should be interested in what's happening. Or if somebody wraps their legs around the legs of the chair that they're in, then they are anchoring themselves, and they're trying to stop themselves moving. Or if you're in a conversation with somebody and somebody's feet point away from you as opposed to pointing at you, then that's a sign that person is done with your conversation and they want to leave. And to a certain degree, what is in that book is true. And Navarro and I had a bit of an argument on Twitter back in 2012 about what was the evidence base behind his book. And he sent me some links to one researcher in particular, which I'll put some details about in the show notes. But I guess the point I'm making is that what he was saying in that book is true for some people, sometimes, in some contexts. but it's not, by no means universal. And I think that was a real start for me to be much more discerning in what I read. And I started to be much more evidence-based in where I was getting my insights from. So I started to look into more peer-reviewed research. When I was reading a book, I was being that really annoying person and looking for the references at the back. When I was watching a presentation at a conference, I'd be the one that would go and find the speaker afterwards and say, can you tell me what your talk was based on? What research has gone into that? Is it your own practice? Is it is it published research? Where did you get your ideas from? All that sort of stuff. But what I found was it would take me, I nearly swore then, it would take me a very long time to get hold of the research. So to either find it, or if I found some interesting research, it was paywalled away, it was hidden away behind a paywall. I didn't know really how to search thoroughly in Google. I didn't know what were the different parameters that you could do. So I learned about Google Scholar, which was amazing, because when you just normally Google, what you find is just stuff that's on average Google. You don't get the Scholar and the peer-reviewed stuff. So Google Scholar is an amazing resource for that. But the trouble is, a lot of what's on there is paywalled, and I ended up searching. I'd search through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of results, trying to find the papers that I could actually access. And then when I learned that all I needed to do was to type in the keywords that I wanted to find, so let's say emotion regulation workplace, and then I would type file type : PDF. So no spaces, just file type : PDF. And then what it would bring me back is just the PDF files. Now, there are issues with that, of course, because it means that often the PDF files are either old, so they've been paywalled that long that they've now been released, or they could be drafts of papers rather than the final version of the paper, or they could be paper from because the academic world kind of rates their journals, so you get like different ratings for the journals. So you have like AAA journals and AA journals, I guess a bit like kind of Moody's or Paul's and thingy for the financial kind of stability of organisations. But either way, Standards and Poor's or Moody's, I think they are. So journals have ratings. So one of the challenges with the ones that are non-paywalled is they can be from lower calibre journals as viewed by the academic world. Does that mean the research is less valid? No, because what matters is the depth and the rigour of thinking that you apply to the research. So you don't just take in the same way you don't take a book and swallow it whole. You don't take a research paper and swallow it whole. There's elements of discernment that you need to apply, looking at things like when was it done, who did it, was that person sponsored, is there any conflict of interest, or is there does it suggest that they wanted to find a particular result rather than just see what happened? What was the sample size? What was it an effect size, or was it how did they report the results or the outcomes or the impact of the study, and are they valid? Because being statistically valid doesn't necessarily mean it had a big impact. He started to sound like Rob Briner. But my point being that it would take me ages to go and find that stuff. And I wished at the time that somebody would do that for me. I wish there was a way that somebody would curate together the open access resources around particular topics that I was interested in. Now, we all know what I'm interested in because I run the Emotion at Work podcast. My company is called Emotion at Work, and it's the Emotion at Work hub. So we know what I'm interested in. So what I've done in the hub is pull together or curated together all of the specific resources that relate to emotions, that relate to the workplace, and relate to emotions either in individuals, between people in relationships, in culture as a whole. It could be emotion in mental health or deception. So emotion is the theme, but emotion is also broad. So what I'm pulling together or curating is all of the resources that I think and I've assessed to say these are valuable resources to have available. So to save you having to do what I used to do, which is go and do all of that searching, what I'm doing is I'm pulling them all together in one place. And we've got 5 different categories of resources in the hub. So one is articles, so that's things that might appear in HBR or Psychology Today or kind of more general press type stuff. We've got articles, which is the research articles. We've got articles, which is talked about. Then we've got research, which is the peer-reviewed research itself. Then we've got blogs, we've got podcasts, and we've got videos. So what I'm curating together for you, fair listener, is that that bank of resources that you can pull on. So when you're thinking about doing a particular initiative, or you're thinking about what's around, or where can I start to find out about emotions in the workplace, then the hub is there for you. That's what I've designed it and built it for. It's curated those resources together for you to make your life just that little bit easier. Because I remember when I did it, I used to get really frustrated. So what's the hub about then? So it's to help people like me, or people like me when I was back in 2011. It's also responding to the fact that there's a real narrative around at the moment that we need to put people back at the heart of work, or as I say, we need to put emotions at the heart of work, or we need to look at the humane workplace, or we need to put humans back at the centre of work, all of those sorts of things. And if you want to do anything involving people in the workplace, it's got to involve emotion. Because emotions are a key part of what makes us human. They're what makes us different. They're what keep us alive and help us thrive as a species. They also get us in trouble as well. I get that. But emotions are one of those things that set us apart. So the hub curates those resources together. Secondly, though, I want to make a point of the fact that the research that's going into the resources that we're pulling in. So it's not just, right, let's go grab some keywords, let's go scrape the internet and find what resources we can find. I'm deliberately finding resources that have got an evidence base behind them. So it's helping to address that, I guess, again, a narrative or a demand that is happening within the HR learning and organisational development profession to be more evidence-based. There was HR's most influential thinkers came out this week, and Rob Briner was right up there in the top 5. I think he was second or third, above people like Simon Sinek or Adam Grant. And Rob's been championing the evidence-based course for a long, long time. So, but when I use the word "but" a lot in this podcast. That's interesting. I'll reflect more on that later. And when I think about the conversations I have with practitioners in organisations and as freelance, and we talk about being evidence-based, some people just genuinely don't know where to begin. They don't know where to start. They don't know where to go to find it. They don't know how to assess it. They don't know, how you differentiate between good and bad. What are some of the criteria that you should be looking for, and those sorts of things. So I want to help with that. I want to make your life easier, because the more that practitioners can have a strong evidence base behind them, the more validity to the work that we're doing, and the greater impact that we can then have in the workplace. Because we're not just doing fads, or we're not just doing stuff because it sounds like a cool thing to do. We're doing it because there's some genuine rigour and research behind it. So come along and join us in the hub is my request. It is in its early phases. It is in its early stage, and if there are other resources that you think need to be in there that aren't already, then tell me. If there's links within the hub that are broken, then tell me that as well. If you think, oh, actually, you know what, you're missing this, or you need to add this in, or you know what, Phil, I'm really surprised that's on there. I don't think it should be. Any of that stuff, I want you to tell me. You can communicate through the hub with me, or you can just send me a message direct through this podcast, or on Twitter, or however you want to get hold of me, really. The final thing that's in the hub that I haven't mentioned yet is a discussion forum. So there's a discussion forum where anybody can post any questions they like, or post any kind of topic or theme that they want to discuss and explore, so that all of the other people that are members of the hub can also kind of join in and play as well. So as well as having curated resources there, we can then take those resources and we can discuss them as individual pieces of research or resources on their own, or we can talk about topics or themes. But it's very much a place that I want to focus on the specific aspects of the role of emotion, how we take an evidence base in the workplace, and putting all those things together. So it's not kind of a generic HR community or generic L&D community. It's a community that anybody who has an interest in emotions, evidence in the workplace, they can come in and play. So if you want to, then come and do it. Now, hopefully, you're thinking, wow, that sounds amazing, Phil. And one of the things I thought would be useful would be to talk about, how did I get there then? So how did I get to this point? So I've talked about one aspect already, which is, reflecting on my own experience. Now, the thing is, though, I'm me, and I can be a bit weird at times. So just because that's what the position I was in, and that doesn't necessarily mean that's the position that everybody else is in. So what I wanted to do was to do some research with a mix of clients, of people that I know or have known me for a long time, and people that I think would be interested in using the hub that either don't know me already or aren't existing clients of mine. And I wanted to do some market research with them to say, right, what is it that you would like, or what would you value, or what can I put together in this hub that would make your life easier or would be a useful resource for you. And that's where we got extra things in. So initially, I wasn't going to do podcasts because I run my podcast and I run that separately. But a lot of people say, that audio format works really well for me because it means I can listen on the move. It means I can take in other stuff, and I don't necessarily do well with reading academic journals. So, for example, some of the podcasts you'll find in there are from, say, Freakonomics, or there's one from Adam Grant's Work Life one, both of which have a strong evidence base behind what they do. And likewise, Suk Pabiar's in there from the Three Good podcast as well. So, the resources that I'm adding in, even though they might not be peer-reviewed research papers, they're coming from an evidence base behind it. And when I asked clients, colleagues, prospective new clients, what is it that they value about me? What is it that they value about their relationships that they have with me? What is it they value about the work that we've done together? Or what is it that they think they would value, or what do they value from engaging with a community like this? And that's where the discussion forum came from. Because a lot of the feedback I had was, we really value your thinking, Phil. We really value your ability to link things up and see the patterns in stuff. We really value the way that you take your understanding of complex ideas and you make them dead easy for people to get their head around. We like how you talk about your practice really openly. You talk about the things that you're doing, the work that you're completing, the projects you're working on, the research that you're running, and you link those things together. So there was also that request of, how can we make the most of people's thinking? Yes, yours, Phil, but also other people. There'll be other people in this hub who will, they may be researchers themselves, or they may be practitioners, and we want to get their thoughts as well. And that's where the discussion forum kind of solidified its place in the hub for me, because for me to have conversations with individuals, which is something I do a lot. I talk to clients or prospective clients or people I know through Twitter or other people in my network, and we have some really fascinating discussions about the topics within the hub, about emotion, how emotion works in individuals, between people in relationships, in teams, in culture, how it translates over to things like credibility and deception, how it links in with mental health, how it overlaps with things like shame. So these are really and also the links between identity and emotion, and all of those different factors and variables. But those are conversations I'm often having on a one-on-one basis. What I don't get to do is to have those conversations with multiple people at the same time. And as cliche and, dare I say it, wanky as it sounds, I genuinely want to make a bigger impact on the world. And I can only have so much of an impact by talking with one person at a time. The more people I can engage with, the bigger a conversation I can have, the broader a range of interests and thoughts and approaches, that really broad diversity of opinion, of thinking, of expertise and background, I think just makes that conversation so much richer. And the richer and more beneficial those conversations can be, then the bigger change I think I can affect in the world. I've said for a long time that I want to place emotion where it belongs, at the heart of work. And I do that to enrich lives or to reduce harm. And some people ask me what that reduced harm bit is, and I'll come back to that in a second. But there's only so much of that I can do if I'm just working with one person at a time. I'd much rather be having a broader conversation. So what do I mean by reduce harm? So emotions, as I said earlier on, they have a potential to make our lives amazing, to enrich our lives, but they've also got the potential to get us in trouble. And the workplace can be harmful for people. That harm can be done maliciously through malintent, and so the work I do through the investigations that I run, through the interviewing that I do, and the truth catching activity that I engage in, then that helps reduce the harm of malintent in the workplace. But also, mental health is a massive issue in the UK workplace and beyond, and that emotion is not poor mental health isn't just about emotion, but there's an inextricable link between them. Because what can initially be episodes of emotion can, over time, become something more debilitating, like anxiety or depression or paranoia or overly rose-tinted glasses with just unrealistic optimism, and those things can also cause harm. You can believe so strongly that you're amazing, you're the best thing in the world, that you won't see any of the risks or the potential downsides, and you'll just you run the risk of taking yourself off a cliff. So there are other ways that emotions can harm you as well, and I want to help with that too. So that's why I talk about enriching lives and reducing harm. So this is phase 1 of the hub. So we're at a point now where we've got phase 1 isn't complete in any means, but phase 1 is launched and the hub is there and available and ready for you to come along and be a part of and to help shape and guide what happens. But there's going to be 3 phases to the hub, so there's more to come. I've got further ideas based on the market research that I did about where else the hub can go. But what I'm keen to do for now is to take this minimum viable product that I've got and make it into something that is a genuine a hub for people to go to, where you can access the resources that will help you, that will make your life easier, that will help you find the answers to the questions that you need to find answers to. So please, if you're not already, come along and join the hub and let me know what you think. Help shape where it goes. So one of the other things that came out in my market research was that, and I think it was summarised most succinctly by Mark Gilroy, or at that Mark Gilroy on Twitter, where he said, the thing is, Phil, you're a genuine researcher and a genuine practitioner. You're not a researcher that's in a university that's just doing research on undergraduate students and then publishing that out as often as you can to raise your profile or your university's profile, or to hit your KPIs on publishing stats. And you're also you're not just a practitioner that talks about research that other people do, because you run your own research as well, and that is a really valuable thing. Because so moving away from what that was how Mark summarised it, but earlier on this year I had my first peer-reviewed journal published. So I completed my master's degree in 2015, and then in 2018 I've published the outputs from my findings. Now, does that mean I've been sat doing nothing for 3 years? No, but because my thinking has evolved over those 3 years. So I started writing the paper in 2017, and it got published this year with the lovely Dawn Archer as my co-author, and we've been working on it for a long time to create something that is of genuine interest in academia, because if it's not of interest in academia, it's not going to get published, but also is of genuine use to practitioners in the field. And as much as I never thought it would happen, it really has kind of bitten me to want to do more, to want to do more research, get more research published and get more research put out there. So the work that I do has that depth and has that rigour behind it. And what Mark was saying is that's a really valuable thing. That's a really useful thing to be able to access from you, because it shows the depth and the quality of the thinking that you have to put in. Now, I'll be honest, I found that really quite tough to hear, because you don't, even though I do a lot of research in identity, in compliments, in politeness, in face and face work, in appreciation, and how all those things link together, it still feels a bit weird when somebody gives you a really good compliment or a really thoroughly thought through compliment. And then when I've kind of taken that and discussed that with other people, that they've said, yeah, Mark's right. So I want to give it the respect, give Mark's compliment the respect it's due, because when I think about it, I've actually got 2 more research projects on the go already. So I've got one research project which is a longitudinal study of how can awareness of the notions of face and face work impact individual performance over time. Now, there are issues with my study because it's all self-report. I get that. With any study, there's going to be limitations. But I'm really interested in can an understanding of face and face work genuinely help somebody do their job better? Can it help them with their confidence, with their performance, with their how they do against key metrics that they're measured against? And how does that work for them? Or is it, is it too complicated? Is it a bit of a waste of time? Does it not give them any value? So it's a question that I want to answer, because it's all very easy for me to go, this is really important. I think this is really key. I think this concept of face and face work can unlock individuals and some of the things that they limit themselves with. I think it can unlock relationships, and I think it can be a massive, massive help with change and big institutional organisational change. I think it can be a really helpful construct to use in that kind of environment or in that kind of setting. Now, it's all very well that I think that, but what I need to establish is that the reality? Is that actually the case? So that's why I'm running that research project on it, to find out what's happening for those individuals and what's going on. And I run the risk of making this podcast a bit like I'm trying to blow smoke up my own arse. And I'm conscious of that, and I'm working really hard to make sure that it's more than that. This is about, I guess in a way, saying I work hard to demonstrate the values that I epitomise in what I do, not just in the work that I do, but in the other stuff that I do as well. So in the research that I'm doing, in the other practices that I'm taking, that those things that I value the most about placing emotion at the heart of work, about taking an evidence-based approach, about making a difference in the world. I remember one of my values that I've held on to in the workplace the longest is, if I'm not making a positive difference, why bother? If what I'm doing isn't making a positive difference on the world, why am I doing it? And that's been with me for a long, long time. And so I've worked hard over the last few years to be dead clear on what that is, so that I can embody it in what I do. I mentioned 2 research projects. So the second research project is going to kick off later on this year, which I've got consent for. We just need to get consent from all the participants we need to get consent from all the participants. So the organisation itself has said, yes, come in and do that research for us, we think that would be really useful. And again, that's linking to face and face work. Now, I suppose I should say, if you're not sure what face and face work are, then you need to go back to episodes 12 and 24 and 29 and listen to those, and then you'll find out a lot more about what face and face work is. And those research projects then should be ready for publication 2019, 2020, I would guess, because it takes a while to get into a journal. It's not like publishing a white paper that you can do whenever you want. And in addition to that, there's other research that I'm doing too. So Nick Court from that's gone out of my head completely. So Nick Court and I we published a survey. We did some survey-based research back in the summer of this year, and we're busy analysing the pivot tables and everything else that goes with it at the moment. But what we're going to do is then publish the findings for that, and we want to do a follow-up. We want to do a follow-up piece of research as well. So Nick runs a company called the People Experience Hub, and that research is also going to be coming out shortly. So those three things are really important to me about me, my practice, and where I want to go in the future. And it's also a call to anybody that's listening to this podcast. If you or your organisation are interested in doing some bona fide research that will get published in a peer-reviewed journal in the future, then let me know. Because I am desperate to do more research projects with more organisations. Because the more research I do, then and if the findings are similar, then the stronger validity that gives to some of the ideas that I want to do my research into. So if you or your organisation are interested in individuals' identity, how that interrelates and interacts with their identity in the workplace, how that overlaps and interrelates with the identity that you as an organisation have, then let me know and let's talk about doing some research together, because I think they are incredibly important constructs. Just last week I was working with a new startup organisation who've just got some venture capital funding. So they've just been invested in by a VC, and they're 5 years old now, and they're due to double size both in terms of employees, revenue and profit in the next 18 months to 2 years. So I was with them last week talking about their identity as a business, what they need to, how they're going to renegotiate their identity now that they have this additional backing, because those venture capitalists will have expectations both in terms of numbers and performance, but also in terms of culture or ways of working or practices or approaches. And they've got to where they've got to, and they've negotiated a really clear identity for who they are. And my challenge to them was, to what extent are you going to need to renegotiate that over the 5 years ahead? Because the organisation's identity isn't fixed. So their identity now isn't the same as it was 5 years ago. It's evolved and changed over time. Some things have held true, some things have slipped away, new things have come in. So for the next 5 years, the same will happen, I would wager. Or the research tells me, should I say. The research tells me that that identity will need to be continually renegotiated over time. But it also has an impact for the individuals within the organisation, because they're part of that organisation because, to a greater or lesser degree, they engage with that identity. What that company stands for resonates with them. And I know that because I spoke with them and that's what they told me. So I'm trusting that they've told me the truth. But let's work on the basis that they are. And so if the organisation has to renegotiate its identity, or has to renegotiate some of its values, or has to let some of the things go, what's that going to mean for the people that are in it? Because when you work for an organisation, you by osmosis take on part of that organisation's identity as your own. Now, it may already overlap with some of your own values. That's, we talk about, recruiting for cultural fit. That's that overlap between what the organisation's identity is and what your identity is as an individual. One company I used to work in, if you didn't fit, if your identity didn't fit the company identity, then you were quite quickly managed out of the business, to put it politely. Is that a good thing? Well, that's a different question. We'll come back to that another time. But the interplay between individual identity and company identity is a fascinating one for me. And so what I prompted in the time that I was with them was some really gnarly discussions. And I don't mean gnarly like, Surf Dude, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure gnarly, but gnarly in the at fuchsia blue way, the Julie Drybrough way, which is the difficult, knotty, feels uncomfortable, gnarly kind of way. I love that gnarly, just in the word itself, when you say it gnarly, it does the way that you say the word tells you what it is and what it's about, or one way that you can say the word tells you what it is and what it's about. So we had some really gnarly conversations about what parts of their identity, of the organisation's identity, do they need to keep hold of? What parts should they be letting go of? What do they need to protect their identity from? And then I translated that down to individuals. As an individual, what of your identity do you absolutely have to hold on to? What can you let go of? And what do you need to protect yourself from? And they made for some really fascinating discussions for me as a behaviour analyst to sit and watch, because there were differences of opinion. Some people said, I think we should let go of this. Well, I don't think that's absolutely not something we should let go of. We should 100% be holding on to that because of these things. And those differences of opinion, and I said at the time that the conversations that were happening were absolutely key for preparing them for the next phase of where they're going. Because if you don't have those conversations in the open, they will happen either behind closed doors, to use a metaphor, or they'll happen in the shadows, to use another metaphor, or they will just happen by osmosis, and things will change and people won't like it, or they may love it. It depends on what the change is and what that's meaning for the identity of the organisation and their own identities too. So by having these conversations in the open, it helps prepare the organisation and the individuals in it for the renegotiation of the identity that is due to come in the future. So I'm sharing that as an example of where I think additional research would be really, really useful and valid and beneficial. Some more reflections on the year then, just to, I guess, do something a bit more general. I said I'd do 2 live podcasts at the start of the year. I've only got 2.5 months left. 3.5 months left, sorry. That's going to be tight to fit 2 live podcasts in that time. I'm definitely going to do one, but I'm not going to fit in a second. And what I find interesting about that is the psychological pressure that I put on myself because I made that statement at the start of the year. I feel like I'm letting myself and you listeners down by not doing 2 live podcasts this year. And is that true? I don't know. You can let me know if I'm letting you down if I don't do 2 live podcasts this year. But that self-imposed pressure is something that I found a few times over the course of this year in different ways. So when I was building the Emotion at Work Hub last week, I'd made a commitment to the colleagues I was working with that we would start the day at 9. So we were, in a cottage. Everybody would get up, we'd get up, have breakfast, do whatever we needed to do, and then we'd start work at 9 o'clock. And my intention was to go swimming at 6:30 in the morning. And I had a rubbish night's sleep. And when I eventually woke at 7:30, I thought, I can't go swimming, because if I go swimming now, I won't be ready for 9 o'clock. And then I started to kind of potter around, and I was checking Twitter and, just generally not doing a lot. And then I kind of, the self-chat in my head was, what are you doing? You know that you're going to perform better today after a swim. You know that when you exercise in the morning, it gives you energy, it helps with your attention, it gets you focused for the day. And now instead you're lying here playing around on Twitter instead of getting your ass out of bed and going swimming. And the colleagues that you're with, and because in my head I was like, but I'll be letting them down. If we've said 9, and if they're ready at 9 and I'm not there at 9, then I'm letting them down, and that's not right and that's not appropriate. And I said to myself, well, that really doesn't matter. What matters is all of the people here know what their jobs are for today, and they know that we're finishing by 3 o'clock at the latest. So, or was it 2? Anyway, everybody had their list of jobs to do, including me, and clarity about when those jobs needed to be done by. Whether I was there at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock didn't matter. What mattered was I got my shit done by 2 or 3, whatever the time was that we left. And I found it really interesting that the cycle, the kind of default setting that was pinging off in my head about, I need to be there for 9. Even though I get really annoyed and frustrated with, organisations that don't work flexibly or don't entertain flexible working and the whole 9 to 5 culture and all that stuff. But yeah, and if I was at home on my own, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. But because there were other people around, I felt I put pressure on myself to be there for 9 o'clock. So I went swimming. I got back and I was ready to go at 10 to 10. And I smashed through my to-do list that day. I think I was done by 12:30, and then I managed to get extra stuff done between 12:30 and when we finished. And it would have been so easy for me to kind of go, no, promise there for 9 o'clock, be there for 9 o'clock, and not done the swim. I was so pleased that I did. Now that's just me running my own business with 2 colleagues. Imagine what my reflections then are. Imagine what that's like for someone who works in a team of 5 or 10, or who works in an office with 500 people in it. If I'm feeling some pressure due to kind of ingrained rules and expectations in my head with 2 colleagues in a cottage in Leicestershire, how on earth might it be for other people? So it's really got me thinking about what do I want to do with that, and what can we do to help individuals and organisations get over some of those, I don't know what to call them. I want to call them programs, but that probably doesn't do it justice. Yeah, really got me thinking. Haven't got an answer. Feel like I should have. There you go, there's another one of these. Feel like you should have an answer, Phil, because you're doing a podcast. You must have an answer for the listener. Anyway, moving on. So what's coming then? What's coming up in the future? So the live podcast is going to be at Christmas time. It's going to be the last week before Christmas. So the live podcast is going to be week commencing, he says, talking slowly and pausing and hesitating so he can open his diary and make sure he knows what it is. So the live podcast is going to be on week commencing the 17th of December. I'll let you know where and when closer to the time. What else does the future hold? Some amazing guests lined up for the podcast, talking about emotion in body movement, talking about emotion in change, in big organisational change, and some other, I can't tell you about yet, guests that are in the pipeline. So some really, really exciting things to come on the podcast itself. And he whispers, I've applied to do a PhD. Hopefully I'll start in January, but don't tell anybody that yet. Okay, thanks. And I think that's it. To sound very much like Ross Garner. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Not just this particular episode, but the podcast in general. I tipped over 6,000 listeners this week, and just felt immensely proud that you, fair listener, are enjoying the content as much as you are. Because the number of listeners goes up, the number of subscribers goes up, the number of listens goes up, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. So I'm very grateful for you taking your time to listen to this podcast. And if you'd be so kind as to leave us a review on iTunes or Podbean or Stitcher or Overcast or wherever it is that you get your podcast from, I'd be really grateful, because those reviews help other people find us, and they help me make a bigger difference in the world by having bigger, broader and wider conversations. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the podcast. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode looking at organisational change with Julie Drybrough, and I'll see you soon.
You've been listening to the Emotion at Work podcast. Written, recorded and presented by Phil Wilcox. Edited together by Simon Leverton. You can find more information at emotionatwork.co.uk or follow us on Twitter at @PhilWilcox. Thanks for listening.